Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be showing you how to install a 4.5-inch lift kit from Rough Country on a Jeep Cherokee. So it's going to be a pretty comprehensive video because there are lots of steps to this process. It takes a pretty long time, it's a lot of work. This is a long arm kit, so you'll find out here pretty soon that it takes some modification. And of course in this video we're just going to cover the lift kit installation itself. In the future videos you're going to see the tires, the wheels, and some other modifications that come along with a 4.5-inch lift kit. Stay tuned and let's get going. Of course, first things first, you gotta warm up the shop with this awesome wood burning stove. Kept the shop pretty warm. At this point we went ahead and took out all the components. There's a bunch of boxes, a bunch of packing material, and just wanted to make sure that nothing was missing.
So basically what we have here is just pretty much springs, lift springs, shocks, skid plate, control arms right there, just a bunch of hardware and instructions.
This is the long arm kit, right?
Yeah, it's a long arm kit, which will give me a lot of travel on my wheels. Easier to climb over rocks and stuff.
But a little harder to install?
Yeah, there's some cutting involved and stuff. You just...
yeah, we'll get to that later.
Yeah, we'll get to it later, yes. Yeah. Just, you get those brake lines, which are metal braided. That's pretty cool. Because you drop your...
and the leaf springs are an entire kit. You're completely replacing your leaf springs.
Yes, you do.
You're not adding leaf springs.
Yeah, you just, set out new ones.
Yep. Better get them out before the Jeep is too high in the air and you can't get them.
Man. What happens in the coffee time and there's no cookies, man?
You gotta put everything old back on and put it back on the floor.
Yeah, I know.
So all in all, this installation took us about a day and a half because it was just the two of us. And one of the things that slowed us down the most was the rust. So we live in the Midwest, there's a lot of salt on the roads in the winter, and with a 22-year-old vehicle, you're gonna have a bunch of it. Now it's a really good idea to spray every single nut, every single bolt, basically anything you're gonna be touching with some sort of a rust spray. In this case, we were using the Schaefer's spray. Ideally you probably wanna do this the day before, the night before. Now you can start on whatever side you want, but we decided to start on the back end because we thought it'd be harder. There's more rust issues in the back, but all in all, it doesn't matter which end you start with. We went ahead and began by removing the original shocks from the axle end. It's pretty easy, there's a nut that comes off. As you can see, the bushing actually basically got stuck on that mount. Now the hard part is removing the two bolts that hold the top part of the shock. It's because most of the time those bolts break. However, we got really lucky on the passenger side, but not so lucky on the driver's side, and we'll show you later how we deal with that. Next, you got to remove your leaf springs. The only problem is here.
Now, another problem is the bolt is a lot longer than the space I have here.
Because of the hitch?
Because of the hitch, yes. Let's see if it moves. If it doesn't move, then... There you go, see?
So basically, instead of dealing with this problem right here, where the hitch, because removing the hitch might be a whole nother problem.
Yeah, we got 4 bolts on each side.
They're probably all rusted.
Yeah.
So rather just take the whole shackle off.
Much for being 22 years old. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm gonna cut this line, this replaced, so I'm gonna pinch the line for now. This way my brake fluid doesn't come out. Just like that, see?
Alright.
So I was trying to remove this bolt right there.
Okay, and something broke.
Well, something broke, yeah. I thought it was the bolt at first. I was like, whew, my bolt broke, but no, it's not a bolt. It's a Harbor Freight adapter from 3/8 or 1/2 inch to 3/8. And it just broke, man. Just like that.
What's the lesson here?
Lesson, don't buy shit at Harbor Freight.
Okay. Some of their stuff is useful, You know, like
Yes, it is. And
they
also,
give you like a whole generation of warranty. You know, your kids can replace it and their kids can.
yeah,
replace
that's actually lifetime warranty, so you can get another one.
it. Yeah.
So, rough country versus original, the stock. So yeah, it does have a lot more.
It's obviously not as sprung anymore over its lifetime. It's kind of gotten flat,
Yeah,
which is why it looks longer.
it really did. I mean, not just flat, but also if you look at this part here, it's like inverted or
inverted.
whatever. Yeah, and also looks like it's been rubbing against this grinder.
Yeah. So you're gonna basically try to make a flat head.
Yeah, as flat as possible. This way, when I drill, the drill doesn't slide to a side.
Oh,
this
you're
way.
just notching it then.
Yeah, yeah. All I want to do is just make it, make a flat surface for my drill to
Okay.
actually go straight.
So I guess this is kind of an old mechanics trick where you basically remove the broken off bolt with the drill bit. Use the right size, just enough not to damage the existing thread, and then take your new bolt that you're going to use, put some grease on it, and carefully thread it into that area. This actually creates a new thread. You just got to take it easy, plenty of grease in there, and voila, you have a new bolt, new thread. At this point, we begin reattaching the new shocks. According to Rough Country, on some mounts with different axles, you might have to grind a portion of it because the body of the shock rubs into it. In our case, that didn't happen. There was plenty of clearance. So because this is a 4.5-inch lift, you will need to extend your brake lines. This is why this kit comes supplied with steel braided lines. Here he is removing the bolt. It's actually a differential breather bolt that connects to a tube. And you're putting the new splitter there, provided by Rough Country, using the existing bolt. You're gonna reattach all your lines on the axle. And just be very careful here. You don't want to over tighten, but at the same time, make sure nothing leaks. Here on this little bracket, this is the area that actually attaches your extended lines to the rest of the braking system. You want to be careful here again, spray it really well because you don't want the rust to break anything off. Afterwards, when you're done, tighten it back up so nothing leaks, and make sure you put the retainer clip in there. Also provided by Rough Country.
Here's what the new brake line looks like. Steel braided, connects right there. Got a diff breather, and then it goes to the connection with the rest of the brake line.
So one thing to keep in mind is you want to spray the brake bleeding valves real well with the rust spray because you will have to bleed your brakes, and the last thing you want is one of those things to be so rusty that it breaks off.
To the pretty much middle of a arc. 24.5.
24.5,
Yeah. From the center to the 18.
18 inches.
So at this point, we were pretty much done with the back. We started working on the front side now. You got to remove these shocks, and they are held with 15mm nuts. So the passenger side one came off immediately. However, the driver's side one was rusted on so hard that it would actually spin the entire shock tube as you would unscrew it. So what I actually had to do was hold the tube with my hands. You got to be real careful. There's a lot of rust. You want to wear good gloves because you do not want to cut yourself with this stuff.
There you go. Wow.
It goes higher too, probably to accommodate the extra lift. This one got a little destroyed while we were trying to take it out.
So at this point, we went ahead and started removing the sway bar links. It's pretty straightforward. There's a nut that comes off. That bolt though in that bracket is actually pressed in, so don't try to unscrew it. You're actually gonna have to press it out, and we'll show you how to do that later. You can also remove the top part of the sway bar. In this case, the bolt actually broke right off because it was so rusted, but that's not an issue because the kit comes with new hardware, so you'll be using it anyway. Now it's time to start removing the track bar. The track bar allows you to make adjustments to the way the axle is basically centered on the vehicle. And because you are lowering the axle away from the Jeep with that 4.5-inch lift, you're actually going to be needing a longer track bar and a different bracket mount. In this case, is what I'm showing you here now. So you're going to have to remove the track bar and the bracket that mounts the track bar to the body. Now with that out of the way, here's a quick little comparison. You have the rough country track bar and the factory one. You'll notice that the bracket itself is taller, and it basically drops the track rod further away from the body and closer to the axle. Also, it's a little more heavy duty and it's adjustable, so you are able to adjust the axle center. And one thing to note is that you should be doing this particular adjustment when the Jeep is actually on the floor as opposed to being raised up in the air. Here we have the hardware. You have the 2 studs and then 2 bolts that you're going to reuse on the bottom. 2 studs on top there have the nuts. Again, those are the factory nuts. You do not get new ones. And then we're replacing those same 2 bolts on the bottom, putting them right back in with a new rough country bracket. Pretty straightforward stuff. Now here we have the spring clips. These are basically retainer clips that make sure that the coil doesn't go anywhere. You want to remove these with a 13mm socket in order to be able to free up the spring, the factory springs, and remove them. But be sure to keep those clips because you will need to reuse them in the rough country kit. I don't believe comes with new ones. So now this kit does come with a new rough country pitman arm. It basically sits a little lower and is longer, allows you for better steering. So you want to remove that hardware and hold on to it. Now the tricky part is you basically have a really big nut on that top part of there that you have to remove. I believe we use a 34mm socket. You remove that and that's fine, but the pitman arm itself is actually pressed on. So a couple things. Remember where the pitman arm is, the factory one. And 2, you might be like us and you won't be able to pry it off so easily. Tried a couple of routes, ended up having to grind the darn thing off. Which, you know what, it's not really that big of a deal because we're going to be throwing the old pitman arm away anyway. It's just important that you're careful and you don't damage anything else other than the old pitman arm. Reinstalling it is the same way you take it back off, minus the grinding. You know, screw it back on, and that nut basically presses it onto the little ridges. Next, we started removing the control arms. Removing the control arms actually also allowed us to remove the old spring coils, and you know, just leave them on there for now. But the truth is, you will be using brand new control arms that are much longer, and they will attach in a slightly different way, and we'll show you that now. And of course, here's the old spring and the new spring. That new spring is way taller than the old one, and that's obviously to accommodate for the extra height that you're getting. Again, that little mount on top there, you will not be reusing that with this kit. So this kit comes with the transfer case drop kit. Basically that requires you to remove the old cross member and add a new one on that's lower. But because you are removing the cross member, make sure you support the transfer case and the transmission, which is all together. In this case, we used a jack and a 4x4. Just place it in a secure position, be careful, and just keep it supported while you're removing the cross member. So this is pretty interesting. There's a stud in the frame that holds on the old cross member that needs to be removed. And the instructions actually tell you to use a jam nut method to remove it. And if you don't know what that is, you basically put 2 nuts on a threaded stud and use the top nut as basically a bolt head. And you know what? It works, believe it or not. At this point, you're going to be drilling out some new holes in the frame to accommodate the side plates. You'll see that here in a second. Just make sure you use the right size drill bit. Now once you have the new cross member installed, go ahead and replace the transmission hardware that you have. Use your 1/2-inch socket for that. This basically, secures everything to that cross member, and it's actually lower now, so the angle of your shaft is a little bit better. At this point, we began removing the old lower control arm brackets because technically they're now in your way because the new mounting point is behind them, and those mounts are going to be getting in the way of the new control arms. You can do this either way. We used both a grinder with a cutoff wheel and a Sawzall. I also took the liberty of cleaning up the whole area and putting some kind of a rust preventative spray on there. In this case, just regular Rust-Oleum black paint. At this point, we were able to begin installing the lower control arms. Now, the instructions do actually give you a length to adjust them to before you start tightening things up. And if you do that, it'll be pretty darn close to the correct alignment. However, expect some work, before you're actually 100% done. You might have to do some tiny tweaking. And of course, the same thing goes for the upper control arms. They need to be adjusted to a specific length as well before you mount them. And even when you do, if you're doing the alignment yourself like we did, there were some micro adjustments that needed to be made. In this case, it's a Y configuration, so your upper control arms are no longer being mounted to the body of the Jeep. They're actually being mounted to the long lower control arm. What this does is actually allows you to rotate your entire axle to the correct position. That way all the shafts and everything are at the ideal angle. We also found that it was easier to attach the upper control arms to your long lower control arms first, and then attaching those upper control arms to the axle. This allows you to put the axle in the right position, rotate it where you need it to be, and then start mounting the hardware. At this point, we went ahead and reattached the new track bar to the new Rough Country bracket. You'll get new hardware from Rough Country to do this. It's pretty straightforward. However, when you do attach the track bar to the axle piece, be sure that when you make your adjustments, that you keep in mind that you're probably going to have to do those adjustments again when you set the Jeep back on the ground, because the axle will then shift closer to the Jeep, thus causing the track bar to be at an incorrect length. So again, like I mentioned earlier, when you do adjust the track bar, make sure you want to do it when the Jeep is actually on the floor rather than being in the lift. So at this point, we were ready to install the new Rough Country coils, but to do that, we wanted to unattach the brake lines from the calipers. You want to use a clamp of some sort so nothing leaks anywhere, and be careful when, unscrewing those brake line bolts because they are very rusted and, you don't want to break anything. But basically, this allows you plenty of space to install your new coils. Here we're reusing those factory coil clips and the factory hardware. Again, I don't think Rough Country provides this stuff unless you get it separately. The shocks are pretty straightforward. It's basically the opposite of taking them off. In this case, we used all the original hardware from the old Jeep. And that was pretty much all we were able to accomplish in one day. Okay, so this is day 2 of the lift kit install.
Yep.
We're excited to get it done. What all have we done yesterday?
Well, so far, we're done with the back. It's totally lifted, secured in place. Now front, all we have to do is just make sure all the measurements and adjustments are in place. Like,
adjustable control arms are in the right
and
way.
then we have to actually tighten them up. And besides that, we'll have to install new brake lines, bleed brakes, and that's it.
The sway bar disconnect.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
sway bar links. That's
Other
it.
than that, you're done, except for the wheels and tires.
Yeah,
Which will happen later.
waiting on those still.
Waiting on those.
First things first, gotta heat up the shop.
So there's two bolts, washers and lock washers. This skid plate, the transfer case skid plate, actually initially attaches to the cross member, which is threaded, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's, I don't know, it's got welded nuts on it, or...
Yeah, it does.
And you have access holes right here for your wrench to go through to tighten them. And then you're gonna have to drill these holes through your frame with the correct size, and then use a self-tapping bolt that will insert in your drilled holes and thus create its own thread.
The transfer case skid plate is pretty easy to install. Just make sure when you're drilling your holes in the frame that you don't make them too big, because the self-tapping screws basically won't be able to be large enough to accommodate it.
So this is the top sway bar.
Wow.
You have this piece here, bolt, I think it's a 1.5 inch bolt, lock washer and regular washer on top, and the link will connect from here to the lower member, which you'll have to remove this text bolt.
So removing the text bolt on the driver's side is fairly easy, you just press it out. However, on the passenger side there are a lot of components in the way, so we actually went ahead and just ground it off. Then you just drill right through it and knock it out with an air hammer or chisel.
There's a copper washer on there, is that what it is?
Yeah. There's
And
two.
using the original bolt.
Yeah.
There's two of them?
Washers, yes, one on each side.
Oh, one on each side of that little metal block.
Again guys, depending on how old your Jeep is and what condition it's in, could be a lot of rust on these parts, so just be careful when you unscrew them not to break or snap anything, especially when it comes to your braking system.
It's the existing bracket.
Yeah.
You're gonna reuse that bolt, right?
Yeah, I'm using the bolt but replacing the bracket, so I got this.
The Rough
bolt.
Country has a different bracket setup.
So if you made it this far in the video, you probably noticed that the wheels and tires are still factory, and that's because unfortunately the new ones were in back order. However, this gave us the opportunity to kind of test out the Jeep and find out what's going on. You know, with the 4.5 inch lift kit, there are other things that need to be done in addition to the kit itself. This includes some parts for the transfer case and potentially new gears and a slip yoke eliminator. Anyway, the list goes on, and that is all to come in future videos. So I appreciate everyone holding on, and we'll see you next time.